No one understood why the quiet nurse never panicked. While alarms echoed through the emergency department and anxious families crowded the waiting area, Leora Voss moved from room to room with steady hands and calm eyes. She spoke only when necessary. She never raised her voice. She never joined the gossip that filled the nurse's station between emergencies. Some people admired her. Others misunderstood her completely. Does she ever smile? One new nurse whispered as Leora adjusted for an elderly patient. Another shrugged. I've worked here 4 months. I still don't know anything about her. Leora heard them, but she didn't react. She simply checked the patient's pulse one more time before quietly walking away. The patient reached for her wrist. Thank you, the older man said softly. Leora gave him a small smile. You're going to be okay. Those 5 words settled him more than any medication could. Across the hallway, Dr. Bren Talcott watched the exchange. She has a gift, he said to another physician. What kind of gift? Making scared people believe they'll make it. The other doctor nodded but lowered his voice. Too bad she doesn't fit in with the rest of the staff. That sentence had followed Leora almost everywhere she worked. She arrived on time. She stayed late without complaining. She volunteered for difficult patients. She never bragged. Some people respected quiet confidence. Others assumed silence meant weakness. The hospital had recently hired a new operations administrator named Vernon Hale. He believed every department should run like a business spreadsheet. Every delay had a number attached to it. Every employee had measurable value. He rarely visited patient rooms. Instead, he studied reports. Within his first week, he announced stricter policies. Documentation had to be completed faster. Overtime required special approval. No deviations from hospital procedure would be tolerated. During a staff meeting, Hale folded his arms. I don't care how experienced someone is, he said. Rules exist for a reason. Several nurses exchanged nervous looks. Leora quietly wrote notes. Hale noticed. You have something to add? She looked up. No, sir. He frowned. I expect participation. I understand. That was all she said. After the meeting ended, another nurse named Kendra sighed. You could at least pretend to agree with him. Leora placed her notebook inside her locker. I don't argue during meetings. People think you're judging them. I'm usually thinking about patients. Kendra laughed awkwardly. See? That's exactly what I mean. Before Leora could answer, the emergency radio crackled. Incoming trauma. Vehicle collision. 5 minutes. The entire department shifted into motion. Doctors prepared equipment. Respiratory therapists rolled machines into place. Nurses organized medications. Leora checked supplies with practiced efficiency. When the ambulance doors opened, chaos followed. A middle-aged construction worker had suffered severe injuries during a highway accident. His blood pressure was falling quickly. Everyone moved at once. Dr. Talcott examined him. Internal bleeding is possible. A younger resident struggled to insert a line. The patient suddenly became restless. I can't breathe. His heart monitor changed rhythm. The room tightened with urgency. Leora stepped beside the bed. She looked at the monitor, then at the patient's neck, then at his chest. Something didn't fit. Doctor, she said calmly. Dr. Talcott turned. I think pressure is building here. He followed her eyes. The signs were subtle, very subtle. Another nurse looked confused. You can't know that already. Leora didn't argue. She simply repeated herself. I think we need to relieve it now. For one long second, nobody moved. Then Dr. Talcott made his decision. Do it. Leora performed the emergency procedure with remarkable precision. The tension inside the room changed almost instantly. The patient's breathing improved. The monitor stabilized. Several staff members stared. The resident blinked. How did you catch that so fast? Leora removed her gloves. I've seen it before. Where? She paused only briefly. A long time ago. The patient was transferred for surgery. Hours later, the trauma surgeon returned. He would have died if he'd waited. The resident smiled at Leora. Nice save. She simply nodded. I was part of a team. The words sounded natural, almost automatic. Later that afternoon, Vernon Hale called Leora into his office. He didn't offer her a seat. "I've reviewed today's incident." She waited quietly. "You performed a procedure before all required documentation was completed. The physician approved it. You acted before the paperwork reflected authorization. The patient was crashing." Hale tapped his desk. "The hospital follows protocol. So do I." His expression hardened. "Witnesses say you pushed for an unconventional decision. I shared an observation. You challenged procedure. I spoke when it mattered." Silence filled the office. Finally, Hale leaned back. "I've also noticed something." Leora said nothing. "People claim you have military medical experience." She looked at him calmly. "I served." "Interesting." He smiled without warmth. "But your employment records are limited." "My previous work required privacy." Convenient answer. She didn't defend herself. She had learned years ago that some truths could not be explained, especially the ones protected by signatures and security clearances. Hale closed the file. "I don't appreciate exaggeration in my hospital. I've never exaggerated." After she left, 2 supervisors entered Hale's office. One shrugged. "Honestly, she's strange. Do we even know if those military stories are real? I've never seen proof." Neither had Hale. By the end of the week, small rumors had become louder. She probably worked in a clinic on a base. "I heard she tells people she treated special forces." "Come on, look at her. She barely talks." The whispers spread faster than facts. Leora ignored every one of them. She continued caring for patients exactly as before. Then came another meeting. Hale placed a folder on the conference table. "We've reviewed recent compliance concerns." Several employees shifted uneasily. He looked directly at Leora. "Repeated deviations from administrative policy." Dr. Talcott spoke up. "She saved a man's life. This discussion isn't about outcomes." "It's exactly about outcomes." Hale interrupted him. "This employee refuses to adapt." Leora remained still. The room felt unusually quiet. Finally, Hale slid a document across the table. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately." Nobody spoke. Kendra looked stunned. "You're firing her?" "The decision is final." Dr. Talcott stood. "This is a mistake." Hale didn't respond. Leora slowly picked up the paper. She looked around the room. Not angry, not defeated, just disappointed. "I hope the patients are always your first priority," she said quietly. Then she walked away. An hour later, she carried a small cardboard box through the hospital lobby. A coffee mug, a family photograph, one notebook, nothing more. The automatic doors opened. She stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. Behind her, the hospital continued as if nothing had happened. Then every conversation in the lobby suddenly stopped. A dark Navy SUV rolled to the front entrance. A second one followed. Uniformed officers stepped out with calm purpose. One of them approached the reception desk and spoke only one sentence. "We're here for Nurse Leora Voss." The receptionist swallowed hard. "You just missed her." The officer's expression changed the moment he heard the receptionist's answer. "What do you mean? We just missed her," he asked. The young receptionist glanced nervously toward the administrator's office. She was fired about an hour ago." The officer looked at the 2 sailors standing beside him. None of them spoke for a moment. Then he turned back. "Who made that decision?" Before anyone could answer, Vernon Hale stepped into the lobby after hearing the conversation. "I did." The officer walked toward him. "You are the hospital administrator?" "I oversee operations." "I'm Commander Alden Rourke." He held out his identification. Hale examined it briefly before handing it back. "What can we do for the Navy?" "We're looking for Leora Voss." "I'm afraid she's no longer employed here." "I heard." Hale folded his arms. "If this is about a reference, human resources can—" "It's not." The commander's voice remained calm, but the air around him seemed to tighten. "We need to locate her immediately." Hale frowned. "I'm not sure why the Navy would need a civilian nurse." Commander Rourke looked directly at him. "Neither am I." The answer confused everyone standing nearby. A nurse whispered, "What does that mean?" Another quietly shook her head. The commander continued, "I wasn't sent here to discuss her employment history. I was sent to bring her in." "For what?" Hale asked. "I'm not authorized to explain." Hale forced a polite smile. "Then I'm not authorized to release private employee information." Before the conversation could become more tense, Dr. Bren Talcott stepped into the lobby. "I know where she usually parks." Commander Rourke turned toward him. "Please." The doctor hesitated. "She probably isn't there anymore, but I'll show you." The Navy team followed him outside. Only one empty parking space remained. Her car was gone. Commander Rourke quietly nodded to one of the sailors. "Check nearby transit stations." Another officer was already making phone calls. Within seconds, several vehicles pulled away from a hospital. Back inside, silence filled the lobby. Even Vernon Hale looked unsettled. Kendra slowly approached him. Who exactly was Leora? Hale answered without confidence. "A nurse." But the words no longer sounded convincing. Hours later, the hospital settled into its evening routine. Patients arrived. Monitors beeped. Stretchers rolled through the hallways. Yet, conversations kept returning to the same question. Why would the Navy send officers for someone who had just been fired? Dr. Talcott couldn't stop thinking about it either. He remembered something Leora had once said during a difficult night shift. A young resident had asked how she stayed so calm under pressure. She had smiled slightly. "You learn to think before you react." The resident laughed. "Who taught you that?" "People who didn't get a second chance." At the time, everyone assumed she meant experienced doctors. Now, Dr. Talcott wondered if she had meant someone else entirely. Across town, Commander Rourke sat inside the SUV reading a thin classified folder. Most of the pages had black redactions. Very little remained visible. Even so, one sentence stood out. "Attached medical specialist. Cleared for joint special operations support." The officer closed the folder. A younger lieutenant glanced over. "Hard to believe." Rourke nodded. "Most people wouldn't." The lieutenant looked through the windshield. She never accepted medals. She declined every public ceremony and requested her records stay restricted. "Correct." The lieutenant smiled. "That explains why nobody knows." Rourke looked out the window. That's exactly how she wanted it. Several years earlier, on the opposite side of the world, a transport helicopter landed just before sunrise. The air carried dust and engine noise. A team of Navy SEAL operators hurried toward a temporary medical station. One of them supported an injured teammate whose breathing had become dangerously weak. The medic waiting beside the entrance wasn't much taller than the injured operator. She wore protective gear covered in dust. No rank patches stood out. No dramatic introduction followed. She simply stepped forward. "What happened?" "Explosion nearby," one operator answered. She examined the injured man for only seconds. Then she gave calm instructions. "I need room." Nobody argued. One operator reached for extra equipment. She shook her head. "Not yet." Another looked uncertain. "You sure?" She looked him in the eye. "Trust me." He immediately stepped back. Minutes later, the injured operator was breathing normally again. One of the SEALs laughed with relief. "You keep making us look lucky." She packed away her equipment. "No." She smiled faintly. "I just give luck another chance." The team never forgot those words. Back in the present, Commander Rourke reopened the folder. Inside rested several recommendation letters. Every name except one had been removed. One remaining sentence could still be read. "Her judgment under pressure has repeatedly prevented loss of life." Nothing more. No stories. No mission details. No locations. Only quiet evidence that extraordinary things had happened. Meanwhile, Vernon Hale sat alone inside his office, reviewing Leora's personnel file again. It looked surprisingly ordinary. Nursing school, trauma certifications, excellent evaluations, very few previous employers. Nothing that explained military officers searching the city for her. He pressed the intercom. "Can you bring me Nurse Voss's original application?" The HR manager arrived a few minutes later, carrying a folder. I thought you already had it. I want everything. She handed him one sealed envelope. We never opened this. Why not? It says only to be reviewed if required by federal authorities. Hale frowned. Federal authorities? She nodded. It came with her hiring documents. He stared at the envelope for several seconds, then set it back on the desk. He suddenly wasn't sure he wanted to open it. Across the city, Leora sat alone on a wooden bench inside a quiet bus station. Her small cardboard box rested beside her feet. She watched travelers come and go. No bitterness crossed her face, only exhaustion. An older woman sat beside her. Long trip? Leora smiled politely. I haven't decided yet. You running towards something or away from it? Leora looked through the station window. I'm just looking for a place where I can still help people. The woman nodded gently. I hope you find it. Before Leora could answer, 3 dark Navy SUVs slowly entered the parking lot outside. She recognized the first vehicle immediately. Her smile disappeared. The bus station doors opened. Commander Alden Rourke stepped inside. Their eyes met across the crowded terminal. He walked straight toward her. Leora, she stood. I wasn't expecting to see you again. We need your help. She looked at the uniformed officers behind him, then back at the commander. What happened? His answer was quiet enough that only she could hear it. One of our operators is fighting for his life, and he asked for you by name. Leora didn't ask why the Navy had found her so quickly. She asked only one question. How much time does he have? Commander Alden Rourke answered without hesitation. We don't know. She glanced at the cardboard box beside the bench. My things can wait. Within minutes, she was seated inside the lead SUV as it pulled away from the bus station. No one wasted words. The steady hum of the tires filled the silence. Finally, Rourke spoke. His name is Chief Petty Officer Keenan Dace. Leora recognized the name immediately. He was with Echo Team. The commander nodded. He remembered you. She looked out the window. I remember all of them. He was injured during a training operation yesterday. At first, everyone believed it was a routine trauma. Then his condition became more complicated. Where is he now? At the Naval Medical Center. She folded her hands together. What aren't you telling me? Rourke looked at her for a moment. The specialists have reached a point where they're running out of answers. That was enough. She understood exactly what he meant. The convoy arrived at a secure medical facility less than an hour later. Security officers opened the gates without delay. Inside, the atmosphere felt calm but urgent. Doctors moved quickly through the hallways. Nurses reviewed charts. Medical equipment hummed softly behind closed doors. As Leora entered the intensive care unit, several heads turned. One young physician quietly asked another, Who is she? The answer came from an older Navy surgeon, someone you listened to. Leora stopped outside Keenan's room. Through the glass, she saw a man connected to several monitors. His breathing was supported, and his face looked pale with exhaustion. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Then she walked in. The attending physician greeted her. I'm Captain Ellis Rowan. She nodded. Leora Voss. We've heard about you. I'd rather hear about him. Captain Rowan handed her the chart. We've ruled out several possibilities. His injuries were stable after surgery, but his blood pressure continues to drop without a clear explanation. Leora carefully reviewed every page. She wasn't looking for obvious problems. She was looking for small ones, the kind that often hid between the lines. She stepped closer to Keenan. His monitor displayed steady numbers, but something bothered her. She checked his hands, then his neck. She adjusted the blanket slightly. Has anyone repeated the ultrasound? Rowan answered, twice. When? This morning. She looked at the clock. That was 6 hours ago. He frowned. We didn't think another one was necessary. Leora didn't argue. She simply said, Let's do it again. Another physician crossed his arms. With respect, we've already covered that. She looked at him calmly. I know. So why repeat it? Because patients change. Silence settled over the room. Captain Rowan studied her expression. You see something? I see pieces that don't fit together. What do you think we're missing? I don't know yet. One of the younger doctors sighed quietly. We're chasing theories now. Before anyone else could respond, Commander Rourke stepped into the room. I've worked beside her before. The room became still. He looked directly at the medical team. When she says something doesn't fit, you pay attention. No one argued after that. The portable ultrasound machine was brought in. Leora assisted while another physician operated the equipment. She watched the screen without blinking. There, the technician paused. What am I looking at? She pointed to a small area. It wasn't there this morning. Captain Rowan leaned closer. His expression changed. The younger doctor looked confused. I still don't understand. Rowan answered quietly. It's subtle. Leora nodded, small enough to hide. The room immediately shifted into action. Additional scans were ordered. Specialists gathered around images. Within 20 minutes, the earlier diagnosis no longer seemed complete. Captain Rowan looked at Leora. You were right. She shook her head. The patient was right. What do you mean? His body kept telling us something had changed. The captain smiled faintly. And you listened. As preparations continued, Commander Rourke stood outside the room with a younger Navy officer. The officer asked a question everyone else seemed afraid to ask. Why her? Rourke looked through the glass. 7 years ago, our team was trapped after an operation went wrong. The young officer stayed quiet. We couldn't evacuate immediately. What happened? We had multiple injured operators. And her, she refused to leave. The officer frowned. Even after extraction arrived? Rourke nodded. She said one sentence I'll never forget. He smiled slightly. The last patient leaves with me. The younger officer looked back toward the room. Did they all survive? Rourke answered softly. They all came home. Inside the ICU, another set of scans confirmed Leora's concern. Captain Rowan gathered the team. We need to return him to surgery. The younger physician looked surprised. So soon? If we wait, we lose valuable time. Everything suddenly moved faster. Consent forms, operating room preparation, additional specialists. Leora quietly helped organize equipment without seeking attention. One of the nurses recognized her from years earlier. I remember you. Leora looked up. You worked overseas. The nurse smiled. You taught me never to rush because everyone else is rushing. Leora smiled back. I still believe that. As Keenan was rolled toward the operating room, his eyes opened for just a brief moment. He seemed confused. His gaze drifted across the room. Then it stopped. Leora? She stepped beside him. I'm here. His breathing remained weak, but his voice carried relief. I knew you'd come. She gently squeezed his hand. You've done the hard part. A faint smile crossed his face before he drifted asleep again. Several people in the hallway watched the exchange. One whispered. He trusted her immediately. Another answered. That kind of trust isn't built in a hospital. Inside the operating suite, surgeons prepared for procedure. Captain Rowan looked toward Leora. I'd like you to stay. One specialist hesitated. She's not on our staff. Rowan answered without looking away. Today she is. The room fell silent. Leora scrubbed in without saying another word. As the first incision was prepared and every monitor began recording fresh readings, an alarm suddenly echoed through the operating room. The numbers on Keenan's monitor changed all at once. Captain Rowan looked up sharply. Something's happening. Every pair of eyes turned toward Leora. The alarm sounded only once, but everyone in the operating room froze for a split second. Captain Rowan looked at the monitor, then back at the surgical field. Pressure is falling. The anesthesiologist quickly checked every reading. No equipment issue. These numbers are real. Leora leaned closer without rushing. Let's stop for a moment. One surgeon looked surprised. We're losing time. And we'll lose more if we miss what's changing. The room became quiet. No one questioned her this time. Captain Rowan nodded. Talk us through it. Leora studied the monitor, then looked at the latest scan displayed across the room. The new injury isn't acting alone. She pointed to another area. We've been focused here, but something else is putting stress on his system. The anesthesiologist adjusted the imaging. Captain Rowan looked carefully. I see it now. Another surgeon stepped closer. It wasn't obvious. No, Leora replied. It rarely is. Captain Rowan immediately changed the surgical plan. The team adapted without hesitation. Every movement became deliberate. The room settled into a rhythm that came only when experienced professionals trusted one another. Minutes passed. Then the numbers began to improve. The anesthesiologist smiled for the first time. Blood pressure is climbing. Another nurse quietly let out the breath she had been holding. Captain Rowan looked toward Leora. You caught it before it became irreversible. She simply answered, the team caught it. He almost laughed. You always say that, don't you? She offered a small smile, but kept working. When the final repair was complete, the monitors showed steady progress. No one celebrated. Not yet. Medicine had taught all of them patience. Outside the operating room, Commander Alden Rourke waited beside the window. Another man approached slowly using a walking cane. His left leg carried the stiffness of an old injury. He wore civilian clothes, but his posture immediately revealed years of military service. Rourke recognized him. Tobin. The former SEAL smiled. Heard Keenan needed help. You came a long way. I owed somebody a visit. He looked through the operating room glass. She's in there, isn't she? Rourke nodded. Tobin's expression softened. I figured. They stood in silence for a moment. Then a young Navy corpsman approached them. Sir, if you don't mind asking. Tobin smiled. You want to know why everyone talks about her? The corpsman looked embarrassed. A little. Tobin rested both hands on his cane. Years ago, our team was caught in a mountain valley after a mission. He looked toward the operating room. The weather turned against us. No helicopters? None. So what happened? We carried our wounded as far as we could. The corpsman listened carefully. Then one of us collapsed. He paused. We thought we'd have to leave him until morning. The young corpsman looked down, but she refused. What did she do? Tobin laughed softly. She picked up her medical pack, looked at the rest of us, and said, Nobody gets left waiting if I can still walk. The corpsman smiled. Did she really carry him? Not by herself. What do you mean? She made the strongest guys believe they could take one more step. He looked toward the operating room again. That's harder than carrying someone. Inside the recovery area, Keenan remained under close observation. The surgery had gone well, but everyone knew the next several hours mattered just as much. Leora quietly adjusted his blanket before stepping into the hallway. Captain Rowan joined her. You should get some rest. I'm fine. You've been going nonstop since you arrived. So have you. He smiled. Fair point. A nurse walked over holding a cup of coffee. This is for you. Leora accepted it. Thank you. The nurse hesitated. I work with you overseas. Leora, search your memory. You were stationed at the field hospital. The nurse nodded. I was brand new. You learned quickly. I learned because you never made anyone feel small. Leora looked down at the coffee. We all start somewhere. Across town, Vernon Hale sat alone in his office long after the hospital had grown quiet. His computer screen displayed an article about military medical partnerships. He kept thinking about the Navy officers, about the sealed envelope, about the confidence they had shown in Leora. Finally, he opened a locked drawer where he had placed the envelope earlier that day. He stared at it for several seconds. The label remained simple. To be opened only if requested by authorized federal personnel. He didn't break the seal. Instead, he called Human Resources. I need every performance review Nurse Voss ever received. The HR director sounded confused. Now. An hour later, the files covered his desk. Every review looked nearly identical. Exceptional clinical judgment, outstanding teamwork, excellent under pressure, trusted by physicians. Patients consistently praised her calm presence. Hale leaned back slowly. Not one complaint about patient care. Not one serious disciplinary issue. The only recent negative reports had been created after he arrived. He rubbed his forehead. What have I done? The next morning, whispers spread to the hospital again. But this time they sounded different. Dr. Talcott gathered several nurses before the shift began. I spoke with someone from the Navy. Every face turned toward him. What did they say? Kendra asked. Not much. Come on. They couldn't discuss details. So we're never going to know? He smiled slightly. I know enough. What? They trust her with lives most people will never even hear about. The room became quiet. One nurse looked down. I used to think she was unfriendly. Kendra sighed. I think she was just carrying things she couldn't talk about. Nobody argued. Back at the Naval Medical Center, Captain Rowan walked into the recovery room with fresh lab results. He smiled as he found Leora, reviewing Keenan's chart. You were right. She looked up. About what? The hidden complication. He handed her the report. Everything is moving in the right direction. Before she could answer, Keenan's monitor showed a small change. His heartbeat remained steady. His breathing became stronger. Captain Rowan looked toward the bed. I think. Leora stepped closer. Keenan's fingers moved, just slightly. His eyelids trembled as the entire room fell silent. Every doctor and nurse stopped what they were doing. Then, slowly, Keenan began to open his eyes. The first words out of Keenan Dace's mouth surprised everyone in the room. Before asking what had happened, he looked around until his eyes found Leora. Did she make it? The nurse beside him smiled. She's right here. Keenan let out a slow breath. I knew she would. Leora stepped closer to the bed. You should be resting. A faint smile crossed his face. I can rest now. Captain Rowan quietly checked the monitor. The numbers continued improving. The crisis had passed. For the first time in days, the room felt peaceful. Several younger staff members exchanged relieved smiles. One whispered, he wasn't worried about himself. Another nodded, he was worried about her. After Keenan drifted back to sleep, Commander Alden Rourke met Leora outside the room. You gave him another chance. She looked through the glass. So did everyone else. He smiled. You've never accepted credit. I've accepted responsibility. There was a difference. She had always believed that. 2 days later, Keenan was sitting up in bed. His color had returned, and the steady strength in his voice reassured everyone who visited. When Leora entered the room, he laughed softly. I almost missed all the good hospital food. She smiled. I don't think anyone has ever called it good. He shook his head. Compared to field rations, this is 5-star dining. The room filled with quiet laughter. Then his expression grew serious. I never got to thank you. You already have. No. He looked directly at her. The last time you saved me, I never had the chance. She hesitated. You remember that? I remember waking up and hearing someone arguing with the helicopter crew. Leora looked away for a moment. They wanted to leave before the weather got worse. And you wouldn't let them. I wouldn't leave until everyone was aboard. Keenan smiled. You never changed. Later that afternoon, a small ceremony was held inside a private conference room at the Naval Medical Center. There were no reporters, no cameras, only a handful of military leaders, medical staff, and several members of the SEAL team whose lives had crossed paths with Leora over the years. Commander Rourke stepped forward. We don't often recognize people who choose to stay out of the spotlight. He looked around the room. Some heroes wear medals proudly. Others spend years making sure nobody notices them. He turned toward Leora. For extraordinary service, unmatched professionalism, and a lifetime of putting others first, thank you. The room filled with quiet applause. Leora accepted the framed certificate with both hands. She looked almost uncomfortable being the center of attention. Tobin grinned from the back of the room, still trying to disappear. She laughed softly. Old habits. A week later, Vernon Hale stood inside the hospital boardroom, facing a group of directors. No one looked pleased. One board member placed several documents on the table. These are Nurse Voss's evaluations. Another added a second folder. And these are your disciplinary reports. The difference between them was impossible to ignore. Every review praised Leora's professionalism. Every complaint centered on paperwork or administrative disagreements that had never affected patient care. The board chair folded his hands. Why was one of our strongest nurses dismissed? Hale lowered his eyes. I believe I was protecting policy. You protected policy while ignoring people. No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. The silence carried enough weight. By the end of the meeting, Hale submitted his resignation. The board accepted it. Several days later, Dr. Bren Talcott walked into the Naval Medical Center carrying a simple envelope. He found Leora sitting in a quiet courtyard. I thought I'd find you here. She smiled. The trees are peaceful. He handed her the envelope. The board asked me to deliver this personally. She opened it. Inside was an official offer to return. Her previous position, a salary increase, leadership responsibilities, and a handwritten letter. She read it slowly. We failed to recognize your character because we judged your personality. We are deeply sorry. We hope you will give us the chance to rebuild the trust we lost. Dr. Talcott waited patiently. You don't have to answer today. I know. What are you thinking? She looked toward the hospital building across the street. I'm thinking about the new nurses. The new nurses? They deserve someone who will stand beside them when mistakes happen. He smiled. That sounds like a yes. She laughed. Almost. A week later, the emergency department gathered before the morning shift. The board chair stood beside Dr. Talcott. We have an announcement. Everyone turned. The doors opened. Leora walked inside wearing fresh hospital scrubs. For a second, the room was completely silent. Then Kendra stepped forward. I'm sorry. Her voice shook. I listened to rumors instead of getting to know you. Another nurse spoke. So did I. Others quietly nodded. Leora looked around the room. We've all made wrong assumptions about someone. No anger. No lectures. No bitterness. Only grace. The board chair smiled. Nurse Voss has accepted our offer. Applause spread through the department. But, he continued, she had one condition. Several people looked curious. Leora answered herself. No nurse should ever fear speaking up for a patient because of paperwork or rank. The board had already approved new policies encouraging staff to report concerns without fear of unfair discipline. The room grew thoughtful. Dr. Talcott smiled. I'd say that's a good first change. It won't be the last, Leora replied. That afternoon, the emergency department received a call about an elderly man struggling to breathe. The stretcher rolled through the entrance. His frightened granddaughter clutched his hand. Please help him. Leora stepped forward. She knelt beside the old man until they were eye level. You've come to the right place. Her calm voice slowed his breathing almost immediately. The young granddaughter watched every movement. After a few minutes, she quietly asked another nurse, Is she the best nurse here? The nurse smiled. No. The little girl looked confused. The nurse glanced toward Leora, who was already focused entirely on her patient. She's the kind of nurse who helps everyone else become their best. Across the room, Leora never heard the conversation. She didn't need to. She was exactly where she belonged. Not on a stage, not in front of cameras, but beside another patient who needed someone calm enough to believe that tomorrow was still possible.